Department of Senior Services for co-hosting this event, and New TV for being here to film today. So today's program will start with a presentation and then include a Q&A, so you'll have lots of time to ask questions. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dr. David Griswold, who is a professor in the MBA programs at Boston University. Just a moment.
For us with the hearing aids, Can you speak up a bit more, please?
I'm trying. This is not doing well. We also do have assisted listening devices that I can grab for anyone who would like one. I'm sorry, our mics seem to be going in and out a little bit. I do apologize. It's at the highest volume I have. Dr. David Griswold was a professor in the MBA programs of Boston University and Reykjavik University until his retirement from BU in 2018. After receiving his doctorate in finance/economics from Boston University in 1995, he taught at Simmons College and became aware of the challenges that women faced in entering the finance industry. In 2002, he founded Vantage Point Financial, which fosters gender balance and diversity to better serve the financial planning needs of a diverse clientele with a strong commitment to education. In addition to 42 years of teaching at the university level, he has led many programs here at the Newton Free Library. So I'm very pleased to welcome back Dr. David Griswold.
Thank you. All right, I want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Is this all right? Okay. Thanks for the introduction, Lily. Yes, I've been a professor at Boston University in the MBA program, and I started teaching there, I think, as a TA, actually, almost as a TA, back in 1987. And I've been teaching since I was 23 years old. When I was a TA in the German department, I have a degree in German, of all things. I then got a master's, an MBA in international business, so I could work in Germany, essentially. I've been a bartender in Germany. I've had a lot of interesting jobs, but then I got my doctorate in finance and economics. But you would never have predicted that with me, because I come from a poor family, Cleveland, Ohio, working class family. My mother had a 6th grade education. She came from Ireland. I'm an Irish Catholic, and she had 10 children. And I was the oldest of them. So all of my uncles, everybody in my family, worked either at Ford Motor Company or GM or in the trades. So it was remarkable, and I'm very grateful that my path was different. I wanted to be a priest since I was 8 years old. And when I was 14 years old, I finally went in as a sophomore at a seminary in Cleveland, Ohio. And that year, I just realized to be a priest, I have to go through college. I've got to go through the major seminary. You become ordained when you're 26 years old. So I got my head all wrapped around that until the end of that sophomore year, when I kind of fell in love with a girl next door. And I realized if I could get married, I would be a priest. But I knew that I couldn't get married and be a priest, so I left the seminary. But it was very lucky for me, because for that 1 year, I was in a different environment. And so I was determined to go to college. And so I put myself through college. I worked at A&P Supermarkets. Have any of you ever heard of A&P? It's an old grocery store chain. McDonald's, I worked there all the time. And so I got myself through college. I got my master's degree in German literature. I then went on and got the MBA, as I mentioned, and I got the doctorate at Boston University. And my first job after the doctorate was at Simmons College, which is a women's college in Boston. You may know about this. Am I talking loud enough? I just want to make sure that's okay. Good, all right. So I came to a point where I was teaching finance and economics, but I thought, could I actually do what I'm teaching? You know, there's a saying, those who can do, right? And those who can't teach, right? Here I was teaching, but could I actually do it? So I decided to just leave Simmons College and go to one of the major firms, you know, Merrill Lynch. You know, I was trying to think Merrill Lynch or, you know, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan. I went to Prudential Securities. Has anybody ever heard of that? You know, it's like Dean Witter. There's a lot of firms in the past where Prudential Securities was then bought by Wachovia. and then Wachovia was then bought by Wells Fargo. But when I was at Prudential Securities, I was given one assignment. This one person I went to talk to, she was a widow, and her husband just died. Now, when you retire and you get a pension from many companies, there's a way of paying out your pension, right? And one way could be to say, take $1,000 a month for the rest of your life, and hopefully it would grow with inflation. And this would be 100% to you or your spouse. So if you passed away, your spouse would continue to get the $1,000 a month. But there's another choice you could do, and you could get 1,100, say, some bigger number, but then the spouse would get 50% if you died. See? Has anybody ever seen something like that? So many of us have. Well, guess which one she had? She had this one, right? So she had suddenly found that she didn't have enough money. I can understand maybe the logic that you might have when you choose it, because if I die, the expenses are cut in half. But when you think about it, you still got to pay the electric bill, you still got to pay the property taxes. They don't get cut in half, right? So some things might get cut in half, but unfortunately that was, I felt bad. If I could have been involved in that, I felt that would have been good work for me to do. So it's been a really important thing for me to get the word out. Educational programs. I've always taught at the university, and I always enjoyed doing things at places like this so I can help people understand, are they missing something? But when I finally got my doctorate in finance and economics, before I went to Prudential, I thought, well, now I can really, do good work. I know what I'm doing, But I realized I didn't really know what I was doing. In the real world, in the practical world, I didn't. And now when I talk to my colleagues back at BU, there's many things that they don't know that's very practical that we need to do. So the experience has been great for me. It's been great for me to teach in the classroom better, but also, of course, to practice better. And I also realized, well, if I have a doctorate in finance and economics and I can't make the best decisions back then, how could my brother do it? How could my father do it? And the fact is, when I look back at it, they don't. So my desire really is to help make sure that you don't miss dotting some I or crossing some T, and make sure that you come away from today at least with a practical thing that you can do tomorrow to have better choices, essentially. Okay? Now, just before I get started, anybody coming into this want me to cover any particular thing?
Avoiding probate.
Avoiding probate?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Well, avoiding probate might be one of those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a presentation, and then if you have any questions afterwards, if I didn't cover anything, feel free to contact me. I'll be hanging around here after this program, so I'll get started then, okay? So let me get started with this. Okay. Reducing financial risk for a worry-free retirement, if only. Okay. So we're going to cover the key components of financial well-being for retirees. An emergency fund is one of those things, but what are some other key components to keep in mind when you're retired?
Retaining property.
What's that?
Retaining property.
Retaining property, good.
Decreasing taxes.
Decreasing your taxes, is that what you said? Decreasing taxes, that's great, okay.
Long-term care insurance.
Long-term care insurance, very interesting. Long-term care insurance is a good thing to actually think about. What else? Yeah?
Developing multiple streams of income.
Multiple streams of income. And that would be like from Social Security, other streams of income. Good, that's good. Others?
Knowing that you won't run out of money.
Knowing that you won't run out of money would be very reassuring, wouldn't it?
It would, wouldn't it?
Right? Yeah.
Preparing
for the future for a disabled family member?
Okay, preparing for the future of a disabled family member.
Right.
I come across that a lot. I do in my practice with people. Anything else? We flesh it all out? Okay, that's a good start. I think we're going to cover all that. Not about the probate necessarily, but I can talk to you about that. It's not my expertise, obviously. So, well, one thing could also be sustainable income. Maybe multiple streams of income could work into that, right? Budgeting. How many people have a budget? It's not like I find out that everybody has a budget all the time, you know, and even keeping up with a budget myself is a struggle. Inflation protection, right? Can you keep up with the cost of living? Tax efficient strategies, somebody just mentioned reducing your taxes, that was good. Diversified investments, okay? Could be kind of a multiple stream of income itself. Healthcare coverage, brought up the long-term care. Estate planning, so taking care of this disabled person in the future, that's an important consideration. Lifestyle and emotional well-being, because if you can take care of that, don't you reduce a lot of your other costs too? That's another thing as well. And an irregular review of documents and your accounts. So trying to stay on top of that. Some practical matters we'll go into, and then I'm not sure if there's any new retirees here, but I have a page on that, otherwise I'll just skip over it, you know, but we have that. And then things to do after this meeting today, okay? So life happens. First question I have here is, have you or any of your friends been surprised by a medical bill or a dental? Yeah?
I guess it wasn't a bill that my husband had a massive stroke, which changed our lives overnight 12 years ago.
Wow.
And found out that we had to reduce our savings to less than $2,000 a month in assets before he could get home care paid for. So it wasn't a bill per se, but
Yeah.
it turned into a bill. I mean, we had to liquidate everything, and yeah, it was a long 12 years.
That's a big one. That's very big. That's a big one. Other surprises?
It was a surprise.
Other surprises? A lot of my clients find dental bills are surprisingly high. You know, they weren't expecting that. How many does that resonate with here? Yeah, dental bills. So there, yeah.
And on dental bills, our wonderful city that plants trees and lets the roots come up and causes me to lose a tooth in the front. And then they tell me how much it would cost to have an implant.
I see. Okay. That's from a tree up being uprooted.
It's because the trees are planted in the next to the sidewalks, and they push the cement.
Ah, so you could trip.
And you can trip.
Trip.
very easily.
Yep. Okay. Surprises. So things to consider: where will you get the money for emergencies, like for a furnace replacement? I just had that done. That was $20,000. That was an air conditioning furnace replacement. Anybody ever have a roof replaced? That can be quite a surprise. And so insurance can cover part of it. And will any money be unreachable if your spouse dies? So if your spouse, I've had 5 clients in the last 5 years. I think it was the spouse died. All of them healthy, coming back from a vacation in Budapest, then had a heart attack the next week. Somebody who was 50 years old in the prime of his life, he is biking, comes down a hill, hits some water, and he's in a nursing home for the next 4 or 5 years. Things like this happen all the time, but in those situations, luckily, they could reach the money. So sometimes it's in one person's account, but not in the other person's name. It's harder to reach the money, so that's really an important consideration to keep in mind today. And we're talking about the emergency fund. How much should you have set aside for an emergency fund? Well, for somebody who's just gotten out of college, just got their first job, they have to worry about rent maybe for the next 12 months, and maybe they lose their job. So can they get through 6 or 7 or 8 months of living expenses? So that's what they typically think about as an emergency fund. Somebody who's a contractor might go through, when we have an economic downturn, that contractor is out of business for the next 15 months. They might need 15 months of salary or living expenses. Somebody who's a doctor probably is not going to get laid off in a recession, so a doctor would probably need less than 15 months. So, but I do find that as people get closer to retirement, sometimes the cash balance is too high. It goes the opposite direction. You know, so they don't need all that money. It's not an emergency, so the cash is not necessarily working for them. It's earning too low an interest. And on that matter, what are interest rates right now at the bank? What are you getting? You're getting 5? Not everybody's getting 5, because a lot of people get into a routine with their favorite bank, or I should say their traditional bank. I'm at Bank of America. I know my interest rate is not 5 in the savings account, so my money is not in the savings account at Bank of America. So you got to stay on top of that, because it's just easy to have this momentum, and then you're getting 0.5%, 0%, I mean 1%. So make sure that it's invested properly, but not too much. But I do find that people who are retired sometimes have too high a cash balance, for sure. So, but accessible, can you get at them? Sustainable income, what are your reliable sources of income, Joanna? Like, what would be one reliable source of income? Social Security, right? What else is a reliable?
Pension.
A good pension. Pension is a good, reliable source of income.
Annuity.
An annuity, like a fixed annuity, is a good, reliable source of income. And those are various multiple streams of income, aren't they, in a sense? Okay, so anybody get another reliable source of income? There's one other I'm thinking of.
I own a studio condo, and I get the rent.
You get the rent. Okay, so rent, exactly. That's the one I was thinking of.
Retirement?
What's that?
Retirement?
Your retirement accounts, maybe your IRA is producing income.
That's what I was saying, RMDs.
Your RMD,
Required minimum.
the required minimum distribution. Now, is it reliable, though? So if your retirement account is invested, for example, all in bonds, maybe that's pretty reliable. But if it's all in stocks, maybe dividends go up and down, perhaps. You know, so it's another source of income for sure. So we have most of those already there. So what happens to your income if your spouse passes away? Does it increase? Does it decrease? As I mentioned, my very first experience with the widow, it was 50%. It went down, right? So she didn't get the entire amount there. But it's something that you need to plan ahead for. And do your retirement investment accounts provide that reliable income? So sometimes people go into retirement, they had invested most of their lives as a younger person, kind of in an aggressive way, and they get into retirement and they stay in that same aggressive stance, but that could be kind of risky. So that may make your income fluctuate. And then budgeting. Most people that I work with don't really know their income or their expenses. Sometimes it's a spouse who takes care of all that, and so the one other person is not really on the top of it, does not really understand it completely in the same way. But you know, the thing I worry about all the time is, are you spending your savings down too quickly? Even if you're coming out ahead, like I still don't spend everything. You know, one of my worries is that those expenses will continue to go up with inflation, but maybe your pension does not go up the same way. I know with the state of Massachusetts, part of it goes up with inflation, as I understand it, but not all of it, for example. Social Security does tend to stay with inflation. And how do you keep track of your expenses? I'm kind of curious, can anybody share how you keep track of your expenses? Okay.
I have a spreadsheet.
You use a spreadsheet, okay. How many people use a spreadsheet? A couple of you. Other ways? Any programs?
Checkbook.
Checkbook, okay. Are writing checks safe nowadays? Another interesting question. I can't get into it at the moment, but yeah, checkbook is good. Quicken, maybe?
Yeah, I use Quicken as
Quicken,
well.
something like that.
Really for the monthly, Quicken for my accountant. I can bring it to my accountant, but, yeah, so I use Quicken as well.
Quicken as well. There's other programs like that too. But I think a simple, paper pencil thing would work. Just try to keep on top of it. That's the most important thing. And how do you plan for future expenses such as your home maintenance?
That is a good question.
How do you plan for the home maintenance? If you're in a condo situation, maybe they have an escrow. They automatically do it for you, and they just build up that balance to take care of that. Medical and dental costs in the future. And long-term care, of course, is a big issue that I see quite often. I've seen it in the 5 cases I was just mentioning. Inflation protection, of course, we're worried about increases in prices. What is inflation right now? Can anybody take a guess, approximately?
3%.
3 is about right. 3 is about right. Does everything grow at 3% then? No. Like what grows faster than 3? Healthcare costs grow faster. So when you're planning ahead, you have to worry about like healthcare costs are going to grow faster than the general rate of inflation. Even if my Social Security goes up 3%, maybe my healthcare costs go up faster than that part. But overall, that's one thing. And what else has gone up noticeably in price? Food, housing, rents, utilities, insurance, especially what kind of insurance? Homeowners, car insurance. Guess how much car insurance went up this last year?
10%.
Good, you're on top. 22%. 22%. Very high. Paul Salman on PBS, the NewsHour. If anybody know Paul Salman? He does an economics program. He did a great program on car insurance by itself. That was really interesting. So car insurance. I'm going to see if this. So, what investments do you use to keep up with what do you use?
Tips and I-bonds.
Okay, tips. Anybody else know the word tips?
No.
So what does tips mean?
Treasury, inflation-protected securities.
Treasury, inflation-protected securities. From the U.S. government?
Yes.
You're using Treasury Direct? TreasuryDirect.gov? Not Treasury Direct, okay. So Treasury inflation-protected securities is just a bond that keeps exactly up with inflation. And you're allowed to buy, I think, $10,000 a year.
No, not for tips. They're unlimited.
Oh, no, for tips, you're right. You're correct. On tips, you're correct. What was the other thing that you mentioned?
I-bonds.
I-bonds, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I-bonds, can you explain that a little bit? This is great.
I-bonds is an inflation-protected security that's issued only by Treasury Direct. There's no extra fee cost.
Yes.
And you're limited to buying $10,000 worth per year per person.
Yes.
So per couple, it would be $20,000 per year.
Right.
And the I-bond has a fixed interest for the life of the bond, which is up to 30 years, and it has a variable rate of interest which changes depending on what the Treasury decides is inflation every 6 months.
This is a great explanation. I'll just repeat it one more time for the TV, basically. Yeah, and you can add something to that, of course.
You can buy more than 10,000 if you use your tax refund.
If you what?
If you have your tax refund transferred directly to Treasury.
Very interesting. So if you have your tax refund directly transferred to Treasury Direct, you can do that. 10,000 plus. So if your tax refund were like $80,000? No. Okay, there must be a limit, but
The limit is $5,000.
is up to $5,000. Okay, so we have that. So this is something you should look into, Treasury Direct, if you haven't looked into it. I've been using it for years. A good friend of mine who's a professor at Boston University highly recommends them. Treasury Direct. You don't pay a fee, there is no commission, you buy direct from the US government, and you get a fixed interest rate. So here's an example. You might get, okay, yes, question first.
Is there an age limit once the person is already able to access those?
What's that?
Is there an age limit?
No age limit, no. Not that I am aware of, not at all.
You buy it for your children.
Right. To get around that, it's such a good deal. They only limit it to $10,000 per person, right? And it's almost like, that would be the perfect way to hedge inflation and stay ahead of it. So like as you mentioned,
Don't stay ahead of it.
if you get a real interest rate, for example, 2%, that's on top of inflation, right?
Yes, except that the I bond fixed interest rate can be as little as 0%.
Right. That's
And then
good.
it always is less than what you get on the tips. So currently, it's at a high rate of 1.3% fixed.
So right now, if you did it this year, or if according to you,
Right now.
you would get 1.3% interest on top of fixed on top of inflation.
On top of inflation.
So if inflation's 5%, what would you get? 5% plus 1.3%, if that is correct, right? That'd be 6.3%. You know, if inflation turns out, remember the inflation back in the 70s, 80s, you know, it was like 18%? If inflation turned out to be 18%, this would grow 18% plus 1.3% for the ones you do right now, if that's correct, right? So that's the idea, you know, of that. Because it's in short supply, I do 10,000 for me, I do 10,000 for my wife, I do 10,000 for my kid, I do, you know, basically there's a way of helping the next generation with these things. And just to say you did it for the last 40 years, you'd have $400,000 in these things, right? And
Actually, it only started in 1998.
you are really good at this. I'm going to leave it to you. But if you could have done, yeah, right. So, but I would encourage all your kids, to look into the Treasury Direct. That's a great way to do it.
Just a follow-up question. What institution are those available? Which institution?
Well, I don't want to.
Banking institution?
No, not a bank, Treasury Direct.
And I'm gonna answer the questions afterwards with her, I think. We got to keep moving along. So I have other things to talk about, but this is one of the more important things. I think that's a good place just to spend a few minutes on there. Tax efficient strategies. You need money. It's an emergency. Does it matter where the cash comes from?
Yes.
Okay, so why would that be true to you?
Somebody pay tax on it.
Yeah, so like taxes, like what would be one you wouldn't want to touch, maybe? Your retirement account, maybe. Like your IRA. And why is that true?
Because you get tax on it.
The tax is very high. It's your income tax level. There might be other places you can take money from, like a Roth IRA, if you wanted to. Although I like to get that to the next generation. So that's an important issue, is where it comes from. You can get it from a bank account, your IRA. She just mentioned that that's very taxable. A Roth account, which is zero tax, or your investment accounts. And of course, there's other sources as well. Variable annuity accounts is one possibility. And of course, the mix of assets is important in your retirement years. What's one of the assets we mentioned is cash, right? What's another asset? Home, property, real estate. Mm-hmm. Real estate's an asset. And what else? Securities like stocks. Okay, so we have cash, we got bonds, we have stocks. And so all of you probably have something there. It could be just real estate, it could be some real estate and cash, right? But the question is, what is the proper amount of each to have a lower risk when you're retired? 40-60 is one possibility. So it might be appropriate. 40-60, what do you mean by 40-60?
Well, it's a little bit aggressive, but stocks and 40-60 and bonds.
Okay, so some people say, I've got $100 and $60 is going to go to stocks and $40 is going to go to bonds, right? Which one is the safe part? The bonds, typically, if you buy the right bonds. So that's what we would call a 60-40 portfolio, but it's not appropriate for everybody. It might be appropriate for some people. Some people don't want to have any stocks. They just only want bonds, and that's totally fine. I think you should go as safe as you can, myself, if it works for your retirement. But that's a question. What is the right mix? How to choose the right amounts each?
So what do you consider the safest?
I bonds, I would say are probably pretty safe, right?
So you consider 60 bonds and 40 stocks?
No, I don't. I don't think that's the best one for everybody at all. So everybody is different. And for you, it might be 60-40. For you, it might be 0-100. It's different for everybody. It's different for everybody. And part of the reason is that some people, like, what do you think Buffett is? Do you think Buffett's 60-40?
No.
Warren Buffett?
90% stocks.
He might be 90% in stocks. I wouldn't be surprised because he got so much money. It doesn't matter if it goes down half. He still has more than he needs. So he's got what we call risk capacity. Not all of us have risk capacity. Not all of us can take on that kind of risk. So that's why it's different for everybody. Healthcare coverage. Do you have adequate insurance for your medical, dental, long-term care expenses? Things to consider is, how much is long-term care now that we're talking about it in the Newton area?
Without insurance,
Without insurance.
about 10,000 a month.
10,000 a month, anybody have?
I happen to know that the memory care unit, what's it called, Adelaide or something?
Okay.
Is 22,000 a month.
22,000 a month there.
Oh my God.
You should see the pools, the gym, I don't know.
It's a very nice.
It's a very nice place.
A neighbor went somewhere for 8,000 a month.
8,000 a month. I would say the average around here could be between, 8 and 12, whether you can go higher or lower than that. So 10 is what I would expect typically as kind of an average in this particular area. My dad was in Cleveland, Ohio when he was in a nursing home. That was like 4. So I say, if anything ever happens to me, yank me out to Cleveland. I'm not going to know where I am anyway, right? So I'll just keep the expense low. So it depends on where you are in the country, of course. And which spouse is more not likely to need the long-term care?
Men.
The men. You ever agree with that?
No.
Why would you disagree?
Women tend to live longer, but they have more health problems as they get older, and so they're the ones that are in the long-term care.
What do you say, Joanna?
Well, you're right, for one. Women do live longer, but what happens when your husband gets sick? You take care of him, right? So many men end up having care in the home and not needing as much long-term care, but then when they pass away and now a woman is living alone, who's taking care of her? If you're lucky, you have an adult child who can help you, but in many cases, you are the one who ends up needing that sort of live-in long-term care.
Yeah. I've seen both men and women in long-term care, but I do feel like women tend to take care of the husbands more than the husband's willing to take care of the woman, and they then tend to end up in the nursing home, the women more than the men. So I think that's statistically correct, actually. So, estate planning, wills and trusts, right? That's part of estate planning. Who has access to your will? I had a client talk about, she was in great health. She was 60 years old. She lived here in Newton. She walked every day about 3 miles a day. She came home one day and she had an aneurysm and died. Her sister didn't know where the will was. And it was a very long, drawn-out process in that case. So who, right now, if you leave this thing today, who has access to your will? Where is that thing? And after that experience, I made sure I had a copy of everybody's will. Like I always ask my own kids, like, if anything happened to your mom and me, well, where would you go? And of course, I have a financial planning business. Ashley? I'd say, that's right. So somebody's got to have access to that. Anybody. So do you have someone who knows where it is right now? Does somebody know where it is right now? Tomorrow they should know where it is right now, okay? That's one takeaway right away. Things to consider are, when did you last update that will? Some people may have updated it 5 years ago. Some people might have done it 10 years ago. My own father-in-law passed away, and it was way too old. And state laws in Michigan, and this was in Michigan, changed ever since then. So lots of things were kind of haywire. So it's something that's really got to be kept up to date. And who's going to manage your affairs when you pass away? So that's a question that is very personal to you, but who's going to do that? Regular review of documents and accounts. As we get older, our spending changes. We may, as we get much older, spend less on vacations, but more on medical care. So things like that will change. Some costs will increase. Vacation costs might decrease as you travel less. Income is going to change. If your spouse passes away, you will lose one of the Social Securities. Maybe your Social Security will be your spouse's Social Security, but in any case, you're not going to have two in that case. So your required minimum distributions that you brought up will increase if everything goes well, of course, if the market doesn't go down too much, if you're invested safely. And I just mentioned the reduction in that income for Social Security. And when was the last time you reviewed your projected expenses in the future? Some people would say never, so it's important to do. And will your money last? I think that was the exact question somebody came up with here when we started this today. Will my money last, right? But the thing is, it's really easy to change. It's not really easy, but it's easier to change the course now than it is 10 years from now, right? You're never going to be in this position today where you are right now. And if you just make a little tweak of a change in direction, it can make a very big difference. I see when I'm doing financial plans that, there's probably enough money left over if everything goes well, but if you could reduce your expenses by $300 a month, it might make a huge difference. You absolutely will do fine. So, it's just very small changes that make very big differences at the end of your life. So this is an important consideration. Check that out. I know new retirees, I'll just quickly go through, there's typically overspending in early retirement. They underestimate the healthcare costs. We all have this experience now, so we know what's going on when we're well into retirement. They're not thinking about inflation. They lack a long-term care plan because it's like it's going to happen to somebody else, or maybe this is their long-term care plan. If anything happens to me, life is not worth living, they might say. And I hear people talk big when they're younger, but it never turns out to be that way later. And ignoring the tax implications. Sticking to investment strategies that are no longer appropriate. So somebody who just retired might be 80-20. Maybe they should be 60-40. Maybe they should be 20% in stocks. Maybe they should be 0% in stocks. So as you get older, maybe the old strategy is just no longer right for you, right? So things to do after this meeting today, and then I'll wrap up with the questions. Do you have immediate access to power of attorney, your advanced healthcare directive, marriage certificate? You need a marriage certificate in many cases to have access to visiting hours at a hospital, for example. HIPAA authorization. Do you know where the utility bills are? Do you know where the tax documents are? Your insurance policies, where are they? Are they easily accessible? What about all the investment accounts, bank accounts? The person who came back from, I'll leave it at that. So do you know where they are? So wills, trust documents, important account numbers, the passwords. Could your kids get into those things? So maybe you can get into it. Maybe it takes for granted nothing's going to happen to me. But if something happened to you, could your kids get into those accounts? Could they somehow help you out? And are these up to date? Your beneficiary designations. If something happens to you, who is going to receive the money? From your IRA, from your Roth IRA? It's something that we find many times people don't update. They forget about it. Wills, trusts, and power of attorney, are they up to date? And if you have a spouse, partner, can you do the tasks typically handled by your spouse? And this is where I find no. So I find spouses will pass away and they don't even know how to get into the bank account. So it's really important. It's like maybe they do the snow blowing, maybe they do the lawn care. You don't need to necessarily do that, but you do need to know how to get into those accounts. You do need to know where all those documents are. So I would start to ask the spouse, if you don't, Dr. Griswold said I should, ask you about this, blame it on me. But I would start to get really involved in that so that it's a smooth sailing afterwards. Can you adjust to a single income? And who has given you financial advice? Okay, so some things to consider. I feel like I wanted to cover everything very briefly, leave you with time for questions, and I'm happy to take those questions right now too. Okay? Yes?
You talked about long-term care.
Yes.
And we just talked about it in terms of what you would have to pay if you had to pay out of pocket.
Yeah.
So is it too late to get long-term care insurance, or what? Can you say anything about that?
Joanna, what do you think?
Also not my area of expertise, but there can be a window where it's not too late to purchase it, but is it worth purchasing it because
That's the question.
it's going to be very expensive? And I think the answer to that is yes. Typically, the best time in terms of costs are when you are in your early 50s to late 50s. If you're younger than that, oftentimes, a service may not offer it for you, and if you're older, it may be very expensive.
Yeah, I think it's always worth having you could do this online. Try to run on long-term care. You could just do it with anybody. Just get a sense of how much would this cost, and is it worth it to me? Then you can say yes or no. So I'd say ideally, I started mine when I was in my 50s. And you know what? I pay a lot of money every month for this long-term care policy. And you know what? I hope I never get my money's worth, I never want to go into a long-term care facility. I'm happy to create my own little Scandinavia, of like-minded people like myself. And if they go in, that's fine. I've taken care of them. So it's something I don't want to use, just like I don't want to use my life insurance, I don't want to have that pay off either. So I'm happy to pay for certain kinds of insurance. But not everybody needs long-term care insurance. So you might have the ability not to need it. So, yeah. Yeah?
So piggybacking on that question.
Yes.
How do you advise a client who does not have long-term care insurance and has a spouse who has a ever more debilitating chronic long-term disease where the spouse knows that the debilitated spouse will need to be institutionalized for 5 to 10 years at the end of life? How do you prepare the finances for a client in that situation?
Well, I've been through that several times, and I leave it to the lawyer to handle for sure. But I will say what has happened in my life is when you could see the potential that they might go into a nursing home, we suddenly need to make sure it's not in that person's name. It's got to be in another name. It's got to be in a trust, typically, a Medicare certified trust, we would say. So that's something you would take up with a lawyer, and you can't. But then you have to wait 5 years, not touch that. So there's a way of protecting the assets in that kind of situation. So.
Can I also add to that? It's an odd thing. I have a friend who went through that and got divorced.
Got divorced.
In order to not lose her money. And also to make her husband eligible for Medicaid.
So she got divorced in order to help her husband become eligible for Medicaid. Interesting. Nothing says I love you like divorce, I guess. Okay. No, that's true. Yes?
I have Fidelity manage my whole IRA stuff. In fact, they manage everything except my bonds. My person there tells me that she is a financial advisor, that she is certified in that she is a fiduciary, cannot have bias. What do you think of that?
Oh, well, I would say she probably is a fiduciary. I don't know who she is. One thing you could always do is look up any financial advisor on the line. So if they're registered with the SEC, you can see if there's been any complaints against them, but that doesn't mean they're a great financial advisor either. I will say that. First of all, this is my own experience, and it doesn't apply to everybody for sure. But when I left Simmons College and I went to Prudential Securities at that time, there were 40 stockbrokers in that office, and I felt like I had always put stockbrokers on a pedestal as a professor, But when I got in there, I realized 5 of them were really, really good people. They were all good people, all 40 of them, but 5 of them really knew what they were doing. So the level of knowledge is quite surprisingly not the same as what you would expect for doctors and lawyers and that sort of thing. But I do feel like the certified financial planner designation is a minimum standard, at least, that likely means they're making great decisions compared to people who do not have that. That's all I can really say there.
If you were in that position, would you find yourself a financial planner separate from Fidelity?
No, not necessarily. If the way I left Prudential Securities because I was, to be honest, I was under pressure to sell. Essentially, it came down to sell variable annuities, which I never did. and basically to make a commission. And I was just very disheartened by that. So I wanted to go back to academia. I went back to Boston University at this point. But then I started my own independent financial practice, which I wanted a gender-balanced firm. And so I'm an independent financial planner, and I do feel that independent financial managers do not, as far as I know, have the same kind of pressure to put a person into a particular thing. So at Prudential, I almost felt like I'm working for Prudential, not so much for the person. As an independent financial planner, when you charge fees, I do planning for people who don't have accounts with me, for example. So it's like the financial planning thing is the most important piece for me. That's all. But I know this person is probably a very wonderful person. I just don't know who that person is, of course, right? Yeah.
Know what you're paying,
Yes.
because.
To have them manage.
Correct. If
Yeah.
you're paying
Right.
percent of assets.
Yes.
Right.
You'd be better off paying an hourly rate to an independent manager. And most of the time, when you're paying percent of assets, you're paying an awful lot of money. And I took a class with this wonderful woman years ago, and she said, if you had to write that check for $10,000 a year, would you write that check? No, you wouldn't. So you go to someone who charges $300 an hour, and you get your stuff done.
Thank you.
Okay, other question? Yes?
I've seen different articles on how much you can withdraw as a percentage when you're retired, and by age, I've seen between like 3 and 5%, depending on your age. Wondering what you generally recommend, what percentage you can safely withdraw in retirement.
I mean, I feel very comfortable with a 4% withdrawal rate myself. I feel, but it's an arbitrary thing. In the end, it really depends, on your assets. I mean, Warren Buffett could do more than 4%, obviously. So that's, I would say, as a general rule of thumb, that could be useful.
As you get older, for example, in your 80s or your 90s, can you withdraw a higher percentage? I've seen some articles like Morningstar says, as you get older, you can withdraw a much higher percent.
Well, it seems like if you're like 1 year away from your passing away, that would make sense intuitively, wouldn't it? So that seems to be reasonable to me too. Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about a 529 plan.
A 529 plan. How many people have heard of a 529 plan? Okay, it's a way of saving for college for your grandchildren or for your own children, and you put money into it. It's not a tax deduction. Maybe it is for state of Massachusetts, and certain states have that. To a certain extent, but pretty much it's after-tax money. You've already paid taxes on it pretty much, and you put it into a 529 plan. That grows, and all that growth is tax-free. It's almost like a Roth at that point. But it has to be used for expenses that are allowed by the 529 plan, which is usually college expenses.
Do you do it through the bank?
The states actually sponsor the 529 plans. I think that in the state of Massachusetts, for example, I believe it's Fidelity.
You can go to brokers or banks.
But you can go, yeah, okay. You can do, so we're getting that from, you can go to banks. Yes, just somebody know, make sure I get everybody here. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes, over here.
I've seen ads for something called a knockbox on Facebook, I think, which is basically, it's just a box that they send you, and then they have instructions for how to, like, every weekend you start assembling the following paperwork or whatever and creating it, and then like it's like a file box that your kids can know where it is or whatever, and it has all the relevant stuff that you're talking about.
I do like that idea. I have something like that here. It's called the Family Love Letter, and it's something that I filled out for my own kids. And basically it shows who is in charge of my assets, where all my money is, where my passwords are, liabilities. This is digital assets. It's all in here, And so, like, who would take care of my cat? Who takes care of my car? That sort of thing is all in here. So, like, when I pass away, this would be available to them. If anybody wants one of these, I can get you a copy of that. Okay, so to see Joanna afterwards, and she can help. Okay, yes?
Would you explain annuities and what you think of them?
All right. A variable annuity, I avoid those. They are very expensive. In fact, I was brought into my branch manager's office when I was,
They always want to sell you.
and they said, David, you're the only one who's not doing variable annuities in this office. And he goes, the commission's pretty good, it's 6%. You know, so if I could put $100,000 of somebody's money into this variable annuity, I'd make $6,000 that week. Not bad for a day's pay. That's what got me to leave in the end. I didn't like this conflict of interest, and I didn't like that press. So I think annuities, variable annuities, that said, I think variable annuities can be appropriate in certain situations, but not all the time.
There's an upfront huge cost.
Yes, right. But you don't see the cost typically. So, but I do like, but just one other thing is, I do like fixed annuities, immediate annuities. These will pay out a lifetime income, you know, and so you put $100,000 into that, it will pay you for as long as you live.
But how much do they cost?
No, so basically what you would do is, like, it depends on your age. So if you are getting an immediate annuity, which means it's going to pay for the rest of your life, it's like buying a pension. You know, it's like buying a pension. You just convert your money and now you have a pension. And so, but it may not grow with inflation, is the problem. And so this could go for the rest of your life. And if you buy that annuity when you're 65 years old, it's going to cost more than when you're 75 years old, which will cost more than when you're 80 years old. You see what I mean? So the shorter your life, the lower the cost is going to be. So you have to get that priced out. You have to figure out what that costs. So the immediate annuity, I think, is very appropriate in many situations for people who are in retirement and they want a dependable income. And if you do it correctly...
They invest annuities, though, in the market or...
No. Once basically it's like longevity insurance is what we call it. It ensures that they're going to pay you for as long as you live. And you don't care about how it's invested because the insurance company says, we are going to pay you this much per month. It's backed by insurance. It's backed by the credit rating of the insurance company. So that's a very important consideration. You want a very good quality insurance company to do that. Yes?
So I'm looking at an annuity in order to add to my income.
Yes.
And so my Fidelity person tells me that Fidelity recommends 9 different companies.
Sure.
And then I know of another company that did a dinner, and I went to that dinner, and my Fidelity person says, no, stay away from anybody that does dinners or marketing at all. So I'm trying, but they also give a bonus amount towards it. And supposedly they're on cost, but like you say, you don't see the cost.
You don't see the cost.
So I'm trying to decide who to go with for this annuity.
Well, why don't you have your financial planner at Fidelity, if she is fiduciary, can look at these alternatives for you and show you what the ins and the outs of them are.
She has sent me the figures and all of that for the person who, there's something called Comdex, I think. That
Well, flavor of the month, yeah.
Okay.
So just, I would have somebody look at that, you know, as an alternative, who's got some expertise in that, for sure.
Thank you.
Happy to do it too, but yeah.
Yes.
Is there any real way, probably not, I'm thinking, to know how much you need in your portfolio to retire?
Yes, there is a way to find it out, but you need to see a financial planner to do that. There's some do-it-yourself stuff, they might work, but I can't vouch for them.
So I've
That's
seen
all.
this financial planner, but not knowing what, I'm in a situation, so this is personal, in a situation where I will probably sell my house.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like we're getting into the weeds here, so I could talk to you about this after.
What my expenses are going to be, if I don't know where I'm going to be afterwards.
Well, knowing your expenses, that's really important, isn't it? You got to know what your expenses are.
Yeah, I know
That's
what they are.
Okay, but this is what the financial planner should be doing is, this is the inflation rate we're assuming, this is what the expenses are going to be. Like when I do that, I have an inflation rate for like just general living, but also a different inflation rate that's higher for the medical part, right? And then, so that's how they should approach it. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
I could probably look this up, but when you were talking before about I-bonds, which I have a lot of I-bonds.
You do, okay.
Yes, yeah, I love them. Tips, and what's the difference between, is an I-bond a tip? And
No, as you mentioned, Treasury Inflation Protected Security is just a bond that trades in the market. Yeah, like, so.
So it could go up and down.
Yeah, you can buy it original issue, or you can sell it even if you needed to.
It's a bond.
Yeah, it's a bond. Yeah.
I've always been a huge risk taker.
You've been a huge risk taker. Okay.
Out of necessity.
Okay.
Which is why I own the condo.
Okay.
And why I have a portfolio.
Okay.
And my portfolio is at Vanguard.
Nice. Okay.
And they have advisors, and they let you say, okay, how long do you expect to live? So I put 100.
Right. Why not? Yeah.
And, how much do you want to take per month?
Right.
I told them. And I can go on any day of the week, and they will tell me what the percentage chance is that I will get that amount.
Yeah. The probability of success of this plan.
But they're trying to tell me I should get away a little more from more risky things, which has been the success of everything I've ever done.
Well, I do believe that you should try to be as safe as you can in your portfolio. Why not? Why deal with it? But some people love the risk like you do, so that looks like the way you enjoy it.
Did you ever hear of American Power Conversion?
I'm not going to get into the weeds on this. Okay, we can talk about this after, but yes.
It paid my house off. It doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, it does not exist anymore. Okay.
But that's the kind of thing I would do.
Okay, yes.
My question is about taxes, income taxes, and also estate taxes are always in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
But is there a calculator online that I can plug in my income and then plug in what I'm thinking of taking for an RMD and giving me, what tax implications that might be?
I'm sure there might be, but I can't really make any recommendations because I haven't vetted them, I guess you could say, myself. That's all. Yeah. To be honest, yes.
Okay, can we, tips is the thing that makes me a little crazy.
Yeah.
Because I know they always want you to have some, because when everything goes down, tips go up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, tips are just floating there in limbo. So I always figured if I have enough cash in my, let's say, Vanguard account, that I won't have to pull out my investments for, say, 2-3 years or something. Why do I need tips? I hate tips. They always want me to have tips. Can you convince me why I want tips?
I'm not going to convince you right now here today until I know more about the situation, but right afterwards I can talk to you about the tips. That's all.
I just don't understand that point.
Yeah, I mean, tips are just a way of having you would have to agree that tips are safer than stocks, right? So, I mean, there's a lot to do with them crafting a portfolio that is safe for you, and there is a reason to have tips, but not too much necessarily in a portfolio. But I can't go beyond that.
And I just look at them, and even when I took class, I
But I want to ask you why you hate them, but I want to ask you after this. Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Did you find this useful? All right. You're welcome.